I mean, the only reason we welcome everyone. We are so thrilled that you could come and meet us and be with us this evening. And I think I'm even more thrilled to have Seth Perler on. Um, I didn't know a whole lot of Seth until he invited me to speak this past August. I had heard of his work and I'd read his work, but I didn't know him personally. So it was wonderful to get to know Seth. And as you all know, he's one of the kindest gentlemen out there and very knowledgeable, especially on this topic of executive function. And so we're combining a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the brain stuff, but the majority of these slides are Seth's slides. I just added a few. He sent me, believe it or not, he sent me 86 slides the other day, and I'm going, okay, where do I put my slides? But it's okay because I know many of you here to listen to Seth. So welcome, folks, again, and thank you so much, Seth, for being on and agreeing to do this. And if you don't know by now, this is the topic: executive function and the neurodiverse individual, which generally means all individuals, because I work with a lot of folks from kids all the way to adults that struggle with executive functioning skills. So it really is across the board, and it is really rooted in neurodevelopment. So, but I'm going to turn it over to Seth, and we're going to get going. I just want to say, for those of you that have any questions around medication and neurodiverse kids, that's our next webinar, which is going to happen December 5th, I believe. And I have Dr. Stephen Curtis, who's an expert in medication and choice exceptionality and gifted, who's going to be joining me there. And so if you're interested, just send me an email. We'll have something out soon. But without further ado, I am going to have, there we go. I'm going to let Seth take over. And again, thank you so much, Seth, for being with us. And we'll be going back and forth a little bit, but most of these slides are Seth's slides, so I'm going to let him lead here. So thank you, Seth.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike. It's great to be here. And thank you for your kind words, Mike. I appreciate you and what you've brought and contributed to the world. And hi, everybody. It is me, Seth Perler. Mike, I may ask you to toggle in and out of the slide to the speaker view from the screen share view every once in a while. I don't know if I can do it from that side or not. Okay, so I'll just ask you when I need to. So, hi everybody, my name is Seth Perler, and if you are not familiar with me, I'll explain who I am in just a moment. Today I'm going to be talking about executive function and neurodiverse kids, and I have the image of a dog drinking from the fire hose here because there is a lot of information, there are a lot of slides, they are not text heavy at all, but there is a lot of information that I'm going to shoot at you. And what I like to tell people is, for those of you who like to take a lot of notes, don't try to take every single note. What I really want to encourage you to do is really let the ideas sink in. Please trust me, they will sink in. You're not trying to get every single detail. Just take the notes on the things that you think will help your child or the children that you're working with. My website is sethperler.com. I have a lot of freebies and stuff like that. I send out a newsletter on Sunday. And Mike, can you take off the thing real quick?
What am I taking off?
The screen share.
Oh.
Okay, so hello. So my name is Seth Perler. Who I am is I'm an executive function coach. And I was based in Colorado. I recently moved to Maui, Hawaii, and that's where I'm at now. And in terms of being an executive function coach, you probably already know this. So my shirt looks nice and wrinkled. There you go, everybody. In terms of being an executive function coach, what I do is I specifically work with students, usually middle, high school, and college, sometimes elementary students, and sometimes adults. But what I do is I work with students who are struggling in school. They're struggling to navigate school. And what that looks like is these are students who are often failing, close to failing, struggling in their classes, have a lot of missing work, incomplete, zeros, late work. There are patterns that they go through every semester, and they're just sort of on a slow, or sometimes fast, but a downward spiral semester after semester, year after year. And parents are concerned about the students, and teachers are concerned about the students, and there are a lot of misconceptions about these kids. And as far as 2E is concerned, most of the kids that I work with happen to be 2E. They certainly don't have to be, but most of the kids that I work with tend to be 2E kids. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So I was a teacher for 12 years. I got a master's in gifted and talented education. And then I got frustrated with the system, ended up leaving and starting what I'm doing now after 12 years. And I've been doing what I do now for 10 years. And I speak and blog and vlog and do courses and work with families and students in terms of trying to help them. So we can get back to the slide here. And the slide that Mike's about to show is what I'm trying to do with the students that I'm working with. And what I'm trying to do is get them from point A to point B. What the heck is point A and point B? Well, with these students, point A and point B looks something like this. The student is failing, close to failing, has D's, missings, incompletes, late work, zeros. They're often frustrated with school. They often are frustrated with themselves. Sometimes when they get to middle and high school, they start saying, I hate school. My teachers hate me. I hate my teachers. What's the use? I can't do this. And sometimes they don't do that. Sometimes they just really internalize it, feel bad about themselves. They're trying super hard. They're working for hours. So I sort of have these two types of students, the ones who just really give up and don't do any of their schoolwork, or who try to avoid it. And then the ones who really just put it in overdrive and they work so hard, but they're taking their whole day for school and then their whole evening for school, and they're really burnt out. And going to point B is where they have what I call good enough executive function. It's not perfect, but they can use a planner pretty successfully. They can organize their papers in their online world pretty successfully. Their grades are fine. They're able to advocate for themselves. They're being more honest about things. They're being more forthcoming. They can articulate who they are as a learner and a thinker and a processor. When they advocate for themselves, their teachers, they know the words to say. They really start to understand who they are. There's some metacognition, some self-reflection. So the A to the B is this place where we've taken the student from this place and we've turned the corner. It's not perfect, but we've clearly, absolutely turned the corner. It's no longer on this downward spiral. We're going upwards. It may be ever so slight, but it is clearly upwards now. And that is what I'm in the business of doing, is helping create that change right there. Thank you, Mike. Now, I want to start off because we're going to be talking a lot about asynchrony. It's very, very, very important in this discussion, and I have a few concepts and definitions I'll go over with real quick that my brain sort of lumps these together thematically, and I think that they'll be helpful to you because these have to do with the root. So this is Einstein, who's most surely a 2E person, but the root cause of executive function deficits. Why do we have, for students who struggle with executive function, which I will define better later, what's this cause? Well, asynchrony has to do with the brain is developing. Everybody's brain develops differently, but with 2E kids, there is a high level of asynchrony. So what we like to do is we like to imagine that things are standardized. We use the word standardized tests and standardization, and we have these curriculum and we have these learning benchmarks and all this stuff. So the idea is that developmentally a student, quote, should be at this level in this class in this skill set at this time, but that is all thrown out the window when you have a 2E kid, because you have you might have a student whose reading level is, maybe it's a 6th grader. They're reading at a 12th grade or a post-high school level. They're writing maybe at like a 2nd grade level, and they're fine motor, and it's really painful for them to write. They hate it. It's so hard to get them to even jot down a couple of sentences. Their math might be at grade level. Their science might be at 9th grade level. Anyhow, they're all over the place. You can think about other domains, social, emotional, maturity, like there's all these things. So with asynchrony, these kids are really in very different places. It's not standardized. They're not all at these places where there might be typical trends developmentally for that age, but they're all over the board. And that makes a very interesting child. Now, neurodiversity, very similar concept. And there's diversity in terms of how they think, how they process, how they learn, how they interpret the world. So, and then there may be disabilities or learning challenges or learning disorders, whatever term you feel most comfortable with. Then I like the term atypical learners. They're not typical in the way that they learn. Everything is a spectrum, and there just happen to be more asynchronous in the spectrum, but I like to think there are so many spectrums. These are complicated human beings. These are not simple, we can't just throw some simple cookie cutter curriculum or intervention at these kids. These are complex human beings, and we need to take time to learn about them in order to best serve them. I love the term outside the box thinkers. They just don't fit in the box, and that's totally okay. How do we accommodate them? And then 2E or multi-exceptionalities. In the education world, there's the word exceptionalities, and that refers to usually gifted and talented, and it also refers to learning challenges, learning disabilities. So when you're 2E and there's two exceptionalities, you have learning challenges and areas of giftedness, then that human being who has both of those things, very complicated human beings who I really enjoy working with. So in the case of the audience here, most of you have 2E kids. So in a lot of the learning challenges, I would argue that all kids who are 2E have executive function challenges. You could probably find examples where they don't, but for a good blanket statement is basically the thing that 2E kids struggle with when they're struggling with school usually has everything to do with executive function. Next, please.
Yeah, and I was just going to add a little bit here, Seth, if that's okay. In terms of the twice exceptional brain, we've got a lot more research now, especially in the last 15 years, in terms of gifted and 2E brains, and we know that metaphysically the gifted brain is a little bit different. It has more gray matter, has more white matter, it's denser, it's thicker, it's making more connections at a much more rapid pace. But the problem there, and this is where some of the asynchrony happens, is that the arousal meter in the brain, which is the sensory part of the brain, the chemical signatures that actually help a child grow in terms of knowledge, we call those epigenetic signatures. Those things can easily overwhelm the limbic system, which is partly part of the brain and partly the brain that is responsible in terms of executive functioning and a whole bunch of other things. So what ends up happening with our twice exceptional kids is they bring in so much information at a rapid pace, but it's also extremely sensitive, and it can overwhelm that limbic system. And when that limbic system shuts down, you see atypical patterns happening in terms of development. And so we also characterize that as asynchrony. So.
And something else that's directly related to Mike was just talking about is the intensity, the sensitivities. These kids are often highly sensitive in different ways. So there's all this gray matter. The brain is doing so much. So they're often taking in sensorily, their senses, they're taking in a lot. They smell everything, they see everything, they're distracted by everything visual. Sounds can be really overwhelming to them. They hear every little sound in the room, but their emotions can also be very deep, very intense, very difficult for them to grapple with. So that it's very common for 2E kids to be very intense. Next, please.
Yeah, we actually see slides or actually brain scans with the arousal meter in the brain, where that sensory input valve is actually denser and much thicker with 2E kids. In fact, it's almost twice the size of their peers. So you think about that in terms of the sensory input and how much they're bringing in and how emotional they can get and how intense it is. And so that is, in a sense, where we see the sources of some of that frustration and stress and meltdowns, etc. And again, back to executive functioning.
So some things that I often hear parents say when they're talking, the number one thing I ever hear parents say to me is, I just want my kid to be happy and successful. Some iteration of that sentence is the number one thing I've ever heard in my entire career of 22 years of working with kids. Then I hear parents say things like, so I think that sentence is very important because that drives a lot of my work. Well, if we want them to be happy and successful, what does that mean? How do we do that? My kid isn't even paying attention. She's not learning anything. It's a bunch of busy work. He's going to get behind. I don't even understand what the teacher expects and what the assignment is. So parents can't even figure out what the heck is going on a lot of times. How do we get the school to understand executive function and neurodiversity? How do we get schools and teachers on board to buy in? The teachers don't teach executive function. They don't understand my child. They just don't get it. The teacher's set in their ways, is inflexible, the teacher doesn't get processing or attentional challenges. Now this is big. When a student struggles with processing and attention, this is the kid that often takes forever to do everything. And it does not mean that they're not trying, and it does not mean that they're struggling with cognition. So that the teacher shames my child feels bad about themselves, they're losing their love of learning. It's sending the message that they're lazy or not trying hard enough, or that they just need to work harder, or that they're unmotivated, or they just need more discipline, or that they don't care enough to prioritize school. And the school won't make accommodations without documentation. They're saying that it's not fair to the others. Next. And what students often end up saying is, school sucks. This is so boring. Why do I have to do this? This is stupid. I don't want to. I hate school. My teacher hates me. I'm bad at this. When will I ever use this? And they'll often do the bare minimum to stay off the radar. I hear that all the time. And I want to talk about our why. What is the purpose? What is school? Why are we even educating school? The word educare comes from the Latin to raise, or to bring forth, or to bring up. What do we do with our kids? We bring up our kids. We raise our kids. Think about the metaphor we use all the time. I'm raising my kid. Raise. I bring up my kid. Up. It's this upward motion. So education, educare, education is designed to raise a human being. Why are we raising a human being? So that they can launch. I like the term launch. So that they can launch an independent adult life where they are, quote, happy and successful. So that's the purpose. So I always want to start early in the presentation to talk about what the heck are we doing here? Why are we doing this? I think it's important to zoom out. Now, we have a few problems I'm going to discuss right now that get in the way of the launch. So for kids who are neurodiverse, asynchronous, kids with unique brains, differently wired kids, as Debbie Reber says. Debbie Reber is one of my favorite people in the whole world. She has an amazing podcast. These complicated outside the box kids, we have this education system, and the cartoon says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And it is clearly not designed for all the students to be able to succeed. So our students often struggle. Now, another pattern is what I call the dip. So the airplane is taking a nosedive. What happens is the kids start out the semester, oftentimes the pattern that I see is kids start out the first couple weeks strong. Then the dip starts happening and their grades start taking a nosedive, but parents don't often notice it. In the United States, for those of you who are in the US, a typical semester is 18 weeks, school year is 36 weeks. Typically 6 to 8 weeks into the semester, the grades are taking a nosedive, but the parents notice it after 6 or 8 weeks. It started after 2 weeks, but all of a sudden, 6 weeks in, the parents get a call from the teacher, see a progress report, the teachers update the grades. All of a sudden, your kid has 7 Fs or some weird combination. Sometimes they'll have like 3 As and 4 Fs. Like, these kids are all over the place. And then what happens is then we start doing the part of the dip that I call swimming upstream, because then now your kid's spending the rest of the semester trying to dig themselves out of holes, deal with the zeros, the missings, the incompletes, the late work, all the stuff. Then Hail Mary is the last 2 or 3 weeks of the semester, excuse me, when you now have current work, late and makeup work, and final exams, final projects, final papers. And that's what's happening in this pattern. Over and over and over, I see this pattern. It's the same thing. And then you have 2 types of kids. You have the type of kid who struggles with executive function, who really works hard on doing this stuff. And then you have the type who works really hard to avoid all of it. They often lie. They are not forthcoming. They are not aware. They don't want your help. They don't want the parents' help. They often don't want the teacher's help, yada, yada, yada. Thank you, Mike. Now, this is the third complication. I think I have 4, but the number one problem these kids struggle with, who struggle with executive function, is resistance. They're resistant. They're resistant to your help, teacher's help, etc. Next, please. I have a lot of examples of resistance. How do you know if your kid's resistant? They say, I don't want to. I don't feel like it. This is stupid. When will I ever use this? Why do I have to do this? Next. They'll also say things like, why don't you trust me, Mom and Dad? Leave me alone. I've got this. I promise. I swear. I'll talk to the teacher tomorrow. I know I turned it in. I swear I turned it in. I remember turning it in. Sometimes I think these kids really visualize themselves turning it in. You can tell they believe it when they say it. But then you find out it actually is in the bottom of the backpack. The teacher hates me. It doesn't matter anyhow. It doesn't affect my grade. She won't collect it anyhow, so I don't need to do it. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it later. I'll do it in 5 minutes. I swear, I promise I'll do it. Just get off my back. So there are all these forms of resistance. Now, why do these kids resist? Well, it's emotional. The little red dot is the amygdala. The amygdala is our fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain. It signals, it gets a story that we're unsafe or that we're being threatened. So this is very, very, very important in my work. When our kids are resistant, it's not just because they don't care, or they're not trying hard enough, or they're being willful. It's because they're overwhelmed. It's because they're having an emotional response. So the purple, green, and blue, the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is where executive function takes place. The red part, though, when we feel threatened or unsafe, we get an anxiety response. The amygdala signals to the adrenals to send adrenaline to the heart, which goes to the muscular system, which is anxiety, which feels uncomfortable. Our kids don't want to feel uncomfortable. So if they're avoidant, they just pretend it's not going on. If they're prone to anxiety, they're not pretending it's not going on. They're really having very real physical sensations. So it's really important that we teach emotional regulation, that we teach about the nervous system, and that we help them feel emotionally safe. We don't just say, try harder, stop being lazy. That does not work. You're gonna get an F. You know, the zeros, I'm gonna take off, you know, give you only 50% if you turn it in late. All of these things don't address that they're having a real emotional experience that has to be worked with, guiding them through it, teaching them how to regulate. So when we don't do that, and I know you all know SING and SENG, you know, social emotional needs of the gifted. These kids have needs that we are not addressing when it comes to executive function struggles, and we need to be guiding them with this. So next, please.
And to exasperate the situation, Seth, it's really interesting because the prefrontal cortex, what he has lighted up there, that is really responsible in terms of developing executive functioning skills, is not fully developed in the brain until kids are 25 years old. And yet we have these tasks, especially all through school, that rely on healthy executive functioning skills to be able to get through them. And that can further exacerbate the problem because they're still developing. There's a reason teenagers take silly risks and do make silly decisions, because they're not fully developed on the frontal lobe there. And so they do make silly things. The other thing is they're so smart sometimes, and I'm seeing this now, especially with the online portion, and they're getting behind, and the teachers threatening them with grades, or the parents are threatening them with grades. Well, they see that grades for the most part are artificial. And so they start to question, well, it doesn't matter. Grades don't matter. Grades really don't matter until I get into high school, et cetera, et cetera. So they're already reasoning it through, and it's called avoidance in a sense, because they are overwhelmed emotionally and can't, in a sense, really process. You can't cognitively function when you're overwhelmed. So, and I think I'm going to skip through this because I think Seth already talked about this, but I just wanted to show a slide of the limbic system and what it's all responsible for. And this is that executive functioning piece. You can see it. And all these things are really, really important to understand the amygdala and its role. And the other thing it doesn't say is language development, which is also very, so I'm going to skip through my slides. And this is just a sample. I thought was a great visual on asynchrony.
That's
and yeah, and so you can actually see, in a sense, a typical 12-year-old with chronological, social, emotional, intellectual. I don't know why there's two intellectual bars at the bottom, but basically this is what we're seeing. And we see this a lot, especially with the asynchronous kids, like 2E kids, is that emotional meter way down at 8 years old, where the intellectual meter is way up at 15, 16, 17. And so there's always that tension between the two. And when you have tension, you have resistance, and you have struggles, and you have social lagging and social behaviors lagging because they're not relating to their peers as well. That just adds to the pressure in terms of our twice exceptional and neurodiverse kids. So I'll go through this and let Seth jump right back in here.
Yeah, and exactly what Mike said. And you had that those discrepancies cause all these problems. And one of the things that it also causes is misunderstanding. And when there's misunderstanding, we have shame. So here is the messaging. It's based in ignorance about executive function and about neurodiversity. And if any of you watching this have used these messages with your child, there's no shame or guilt in this. Let's just figure it out. So we've all been raised with our own baggage and belief systems about the world. Okay. So, but what we do when we're ignorant about this stuff is we convey messaging to our child that says, you're lazy, you're unmotivated, you're not trying hard enough, you're not disciplined, you don't care enough. And I think I talked enough about this already, but is it a can't or a won't? If they're legitimately neurodiverse, developing asynchronously, and they have legitimate executive function struggles, then it is a can't. They can't do what we're asking them to do. They do not have these skills, the executive function skills, and they don't have what they need to do what we're asking them to do. But when we think it's a won't, that they're being lazy or unmotivated, or they just need to try harder or whatever, when we think it's that they won't do it, then those messages, they can internalize those messages. We're sending them, they can start thinking, I'm bad, I'm not good enough, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I'm not smart, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken. And then they really get to that story, particularly in middle and high school. I can't, it's too hard, I give up, it's overwhelming, this is stupid, why should I try? And we can really understand how they feel when we think of it in this context. Why should they try? When they do try, it doesn't get them anywhere. Maybe they're getting C's, but it's so much energy to feel like they're not, and that they feel so beaten down and so jaded and so not seen and not understood. And where's the solution for them? Wait till next year? One of the worst things I ever hear is we're just waiting for this school year to be over. I mean, can you imagine how the child feels in that situation? So I see this stuff a lot. Next, please. So what's called attachment theory is very, 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 very important in my work also. So the emotional regulation piece, the nervous system piece, and then the attachment theory piece are huge in my work. So what is attachment theory? You can Google attachment theory if you want. But basically, when we have strong, healthy, secure attachment with a friend, with a spouse, with a coworker, with anybody in our life, we feel safe with that person and we feel seen by that person. It's a secure relationship. It's not anxious. We're not avoiding relating with the other person. There's a strong self-esteem with the people in the relationship. There's comfortable intimacy. It's healthy vulnerability. It's attuned. There's assertive communication. It's responsive. It's empathetic. It feels connected. But there are two other types. Well, there's basically secure and insecure. The three yellow ones are basically insecure. You have avoidant and anxious. Avoidant is really easy to see avoidant people. They tend to be called neglectful. They tend to feel distant or closed off. They tend to seem independent. Relationships seem not as important to them. They don't express emotions easily. The anxious person, they are very preoccupied with the relationship. They are often labeled as needy or clingy. They're very worried about what others think, sensitive, may not communicate very directly. They seek a lot of approval. And then the disorganized is kind of a mix. So you're avoidant and you're anxious and you're secure. Now, everybody's all three, or you could say all four. Everybody is all of them. But what we want to do, some people are more clearly anxious. Some are clearly avoidant. Some are clearly secure. But with our children, and with me working with kids, with Mike working with kids, with parents with their kids, with great teachers, there is a security there. Those kids, the reason I'm able to take a highly resistant kid in high school who wants nothing to have to do with me, who hates school, and then they finally start working with me and they finally start changing and they can get from the A to the B, the reason I'm able to help them work through their resistance is because they feel secure with me. I could not do my work otherwise. Mike could not make his magic happen with families otherwise. We need to create a sense of security with those kids. So this is huge for all adults to work on more and more and more. Look at our own baggage. We've all got it. There's no shame in it. What can we do about it? Next, thank you.
This is part of the reason it sometimes takes longer to work with these kids, because just what Seth said is so important. You have to, as a therapist in a sense, as a coach, develop a relationship with the kids and develop trust. They've been beaten up and beaten up and beaten up. So when you mention certain words like education, like homework, like this and that, go down the list, tests, et cetera, and when you talk general education terms, sometimes that's going to get their hackles up right away. So you have to kind of go around and really get to know them, know their strengths and interests, because guess what? Twice exceptional kids have intense strengths, intense interests. And if you can hook those in, you can develop trust. And that is so important. So I'm really glad Seth said that.
And this just goes on with the same thing. I love this metaphor because I like climbing. This person, if you could, in the close up of this picture, you can see the person does not look scared because they are a very experienced climber and they're not scared. This person just fell. That little clip there where the rope is clipped into the rock there, that is going to save this person's life. But so is the person down below at the end of the rope who you don't see in the picture. This person is called en belay. So when you're rock climbing, the person says en belay, which means, am I safe? And the person said, the person who's holding the person says, belay is on, meaning you are safe. And then the person says climbing. And then the person below says climb on, meaning start your climb, you are safe. So belay, that if that person dropped the rope, this person would crash and be injured or die. Okay. So in order for us to belay our kids where they feel safe and seen, we have to attune with them. Okay. We have to be attuned. We have to do what's called co-regulate, where we are co-regulating. So if I was to tell you a joke and smile right now, you even watching me over the internet might smile. If I was to go like this, some of you watching just took a deep breath, just watching me. I didn't even have to say take a breath because we're co-regulating all the time. There's something called the polyvagal ladder you may be interested in researching. So I really want to encourage you guys to research attunement, co-regulation, and polyvagal ladder in terms of learning more about your kids and how our nervous systems are always talking, okay, parents? We are always speaking to each other nervous systems. Even you go into the grocery store, you walk up to the clerk, and you immediately co-regulate with that person. We are doing it when you walk by someone down the street, you don't think anything of it, you are co-regulating. We are constantly vibing nervous systems. But with our kids, it's very important to understand how impactful this co-regulation is and how we can work on our own nervous systems and our own emotional regulation and really help our kids. But we can also be dysregulated and really our nervous system is telling our child, hey, guess what? I'm not regulated. I don't feel safe. You probably shouldn't feel safe. And it really is something we have an opportunity to grow in. Thanks, Mike. All right, so real brief. I have a lot more to get to, so I'm going to talk a little bit faster, and I know I talk fast anyhow. But I like to talk about the story in the body. So when we're talking about the nervous system, we have these two big things, the story and the body. So when I'm working with kids and I'm trying to help them learn to regulate emotion, and I will give you all practical strategies later on, but when we are talking about the nervous system, and I'm teaching my kids how to regulate their nervous systems, either directly or indirectly, I'm contending with two things. The story and the body. The story is that you, the viewer, me, Mike, we all have stories and narratives in our mind. And sometimes those stories are not accurate. Sometimes we make mountains out of molehills. Sometimes it is exaggerated. The story is this big when the reality of the situation is only this big, or the opposite. So when I'm working with my students, their story, their narrative, as I mentioned before, is often something like this. I'll tell you my story. When I was a young person, my narrative, my main inner critic narrative was, I'm a lazy failure. I can't do it. Why try? That was my thing about me. I'm a lazy failure. I'm never going to be able to do this. Now, I repeated that story so many times. I used it to my advantage to not execute. The only way I was able to change my life around after I failed out of college, dropped out of a second college before failing out, almost failed out of high school, and struggled with school since first grade. The only way I was able to turn my life around was by starting to change the story and the narrative and then working with the body. Had I not done that, had I not changed my mindset or my attitude or my perception or my story or my narrative, I would not have been able to change my life. So when I'm working with the kids, their story is, You know, like mentioned before, I hate school. School sucks. My teachers hate me. This is useless. When am I ever going to use this? This is dumb. This is too hard. I can't. So those stories, Mike and I have to work with to help the child. And here's what you don't do to change someone's story. You don't lecture. You don't nag. You don't use logic. You don't use reason. I don't do that with my students. I do sometimes, but we have to be regulated if we're going to get there. What often happens, and I work with parents all the time, is that they're using the lectures and the nagging and the logic and the reason to, at a time when their child is dysregulated, both nervous systems are dysregulated, to try to get their child to see the light, to change their story. And it doesn't work, and they try harder for months and years later. That is not how we change a story. The way we change the story is through secure attachment and helping our kids feel heard and seen and understood and known. We first have to make them feel heard. Before, we need to do 10% of the talking, let them do, and we do 90% of the listening, let them do 90% of the talking. And that's often not what we do. The other thing is the body. Like I said before, with the nervous system, with the amygdala, with the anxiety, with the adrenals, the body is feeling discomfort. It feels yucky. It feels uncomfortable. Our skin is crawling. We want to jump out of our skin. All these different metaphors we use, that's what's happening. Our kids are uncomfortable. We have to help them understand. So oftentimes we're not co-regulating, we're not attuning, we're not even noticing that they're having a physical experience and that it's uncomfortable. And we have to learn that ourselves. In our culture, we don't talk much about how we feel. We don't identify it. We're not good at it in this culture. And I know a lot of you watching have worked on yourself and have learned a lot about how your nervous systems are so powerful. And you could put that in the chat right now. If anybody has done work on themselves and has learned a lot about your nervous system and how reactive we are, please let other people know, because I think it's so important to know that this stuff works. When we learn how our bodies get dysregulated, we can help our kids better. Okay, I guess nobody.
That is part of the metacognitive process of self-understanding. And I know when we talk with kids that are anxious, I actually start with the brain. What is happening in the brain in terms of tricking your body into being anxious? How is it tricking the vagal nerve into going overtime? How is it tricking your emotions and your feelings, et cetera, et cetera? Once they understand the neurodiverse process of their brain development, they can better accept difference in a sense. But Seth is right on. Reflective listening is a much ignored executive function that has to be part of any story, any narrative, especially when your kids are struggling.
So that was a long explanation, and thank you for the comments. I appreciate those. But I think it's so pivotal. So now we get to a strategy, the first strategy that I'm going to talk about. So one of the problems with school that we're having right now is kids are not engaged, but especially with COVID right now, kids are even less engaged. I do have a lot of my students who find it easier right now with the online schooling. It's very polarized, and then a lot who are just like, this is so much harder. So it's all over the board with this. But the question is, and if you are taking notes, and this I believe will be recorded for everybody, but the question is that I want to pose that I think you can use as a strategy in the back of your head is asking, especially for you teachers out there, but for you parents too, you can sort of filter what's going on in school by asking this question. How can we create engaging learning experiences that build upon our kids' gifts, talents, interests, passions, curiosities? What matters to our kids? What gives them meaning? What is purposeful to them? Because so much of school through traditional schooling is not engaging, doesn't build upon their gifts and talents. You know, it's very cookie cutter. So the question is, how do we create that? Next.
And can I share a quick example?
Always.
So I do passion projects with kids, and mostly they're twice exceptional kids. And it is amazing to see the turnaround from the I can't to the I want to and I will when you engage them in a passion project. So I have one young man who is really struggling, and we just said, forget about the school stuff, forget about all that periphery. What is it you really want to do? Because I can thematically bring in the subjects, I can bring in the science and the math and all those things in, but let's focus on the passion. So he's doing a virtual reality, he's creating a game, and you wouldn't believe how much stuff in terms of the school stuff can be engaged in his passion. And so there's definitely ways around it, but you change kids, you change their their schema almost in a sense in terms of how their attitudes approach school, et cetera, et cetera. And especially in this age with COVID, we're seeing all kinds of issues. But yeah, using passions is so important there.
Now, in this one, I don't know why it says 5, but not looking beneath the surface is another problem that we run into. I won't go too much into there, but basically we see the late work, the procrastination, all those things, but we have to look at what's going on with neurodiverse kids underneath the surface, and there can be many things going on. We often don't address them, and again, we think about the can't and won't. You know, it's usually can't, and we have to figure out what's going on underneath the surface. Next, please. Okay, now we're going to get into what is EF. Isn't that funny that it's this far in the 40 minutes into it and now I'm finally defining it? I think you know what it is though if you're here. It just means to get stuff done. There are many clinical definitions. There are many experts. Some experts say there are 3 aspects, 5 aspects, 8 aspects. I don't really care. What I need to know in order to help you and the families that I work with is it has to do with getting stuff done. And there are 2 main areas and we can keep it real simple, okay? Schoolwork and responsibilities. My kid needs to get their schoolwork done and their responsibilities done. Why? Because I want them to launch and have a good life, you know? So that's what executive function is. Now there are aspects to it I'll go into in a minute. Well, what's the problem? If they just need to get stuff done, what's the problem? Well, the problem is the resistance. I don't feel like it. They've got excuses. They procrastinate. If they don't get the stuff done, then they will limit their choices and possibilities in life. And the consequences are real. And they will not have the happy and successful future we hope for. So this is no joke. When you see adults who struggle, that's because they struggle with execution in some way, shape, or form. So how do we get stuff done? Well, the way that I teach it is systems, mindsets, routines, and then baby steps. And I'll talk a little bit about it today, but basically these kids need systems. Kids who have strong executive function, and for you parents out there with strong executive function, you are systems thinkers. You are linear, you're a step-by-step. Your brain says, oh, there's a problem. I need a system to solve the problem. Theirs don't. It's a legitimate struggle. Their brain doesn't say, oh, I need a system. So what systems do they need? Planners, folders, advocacy. These are study space. These are sort of systems that don't come intuitively to them. Mindsets, the mindset of I can and I don't need to let the resistance rule my life. Routines and habits, you don't just give a kid a system and say change your mindset and then everything's fine. They have to build routines and habits over a long period of time. And I think this is frustrating for parents and teachers because they're like, I already told you, I already showed you how to do it. Well, who cares? It is not a habit and a routine yet. It takes a very, very, very long time. Imagine it's going to take 10 times longer than you think it should. And come from empathy and compassion. I just see a lot of, you know, these kids are like, they're taught how to do something in 2 seconds and the expectation is that they have it. They have exceptional executive function, that's a different thing. But for these kids, they really need a lot of practice. And then the last thing is that baby steps are everything in this game. We know as parents and teachers, a lot of us can be very anxious. The kid needs to just finish the work or they're going to fail the class. You know, we can see the matrix of what needs to be done, but all the pressure we put on them does not get them past the finish line. This is a game of baby steps, micro steps, tiny successes. Every micro success counts and matters. This is not about massive change. This is about stacking micro successes together where eventually you get from the A to B. Please trust me on this. The patience hat is so big here. Thank you. I don't need to talk about this one. So before I get to the aspects of executive function, briefly, you can look up the marshmallow study. I'm not going to talk about it much here, but basically executive function has a lot to do with delaying gratification, being able to wait. And being patient, having this thing called, quote, self-control so that they can get the things done that they need to get done. These kids don't want to delay gratification. Can you go to the next one, please? So kids who struggle with executive function, is very hard for them to delay that gratification. They want to do a preferred activity rather than the responsibilities and the schoolwork. Fortunately, and I love the one where he's smelling it in number 6. He's just torturing himself. He ends up eating it. So he can't delay the gratification with the marshmallow here. But fortunately, executive function skills are teachable. And when we have these skills, our kids have more choices and possibilities in life. So this stuff, you know, people can learn this. Thanks. Next. All right. Now, I don't even know if there's 20, but basically, I don't even care if there's 20. Like I said, some experts say 3, 5, 8, doesn't matter. I list a bunch of them because I really want things to be very digestible to parents and teachers, and I want you to hear them in language, and many of the experts in the executive function world speak so far above my head, I don't even know what the hell they're talking about. So what are the aspects? So I want you to think of a wheel, and all of these different spokes, they all work together. So these aren't independent aspects. They're all interrelated. They work together to help the whole thing. So let's go with aspect number 1, which is planning. This is a massive skill. Planning is very hard. You have daily planning. You have long-term planning, short-term planning. These kids don't know these skills of planning. So just handing them a school planner at the beginning of the school year and saying, write your name on the front of it, does not teach planning. Just having 5 pages in the front of the planner teaching how to use a planner, do you know what? The kids who need to learn how to use a planner don't read those 5 pages. The kids who are already decent at using planners are the ones who read those 5 pages about how to use a planner. So we need to compassionately, empathetically, and patiently teach planning. Next. Time management. Next. Organization, enough said. You can organize your space, your thoughts, your papers. There are 3 main things I talk about with organizing. Prioritizing, that's with the inhibition. What are we going to prioritize? Okay, next. Decision making. So Hobbs says, you better hurry, your mom's yelling something. Well, mom was yelling, don't do that. That is a bad decision. Mike mentioned decision making earlier. So decision making is part of executive function. Next. Another aspect of executive function is inhibition, holding back. There are times when you don't do something that's inappropriate. And that is the other side of that coin is impulsivity. When we don't inhibit, we are being impulsive. So these kids often struggle to inhibit things at the right time.
This is especially dangerous in the mall, just so you know.
In the mall?
Yeah.
Yeah. Distractibility. These kids are easily distracted. What's the other side of the coin of distractibility? Next. Concentration, attention, and focus. When you are not distracted, you are concentrating or attending or focusing, whatever word you like, same thing. Next. Another aspect of executive function, I just say detail-oriented. I don't know if it's technically an aspect, but these kids miss the details. This kid got a 10 out of 12. That's great. They didn't put their name on the paper. I have kids who do their homework and don't turn it in and get zeros. They miss a lot of details. Their parents will say, hey, go grab this, this, and this, and they forget 1 or 2 or all 3 of them. They miss a lot of details if it's not important to them.
And a lot of times with gifted kids, and especially 2E kids, if the stuff is too easy, they go much too quickly. And then they make very silly and dumb mistakes. And therefore, their grades are affected by that because the teacher isn't looking at it that way. They're looking at it, does the child know the material? And if you're making silly mistakes because you're not paying attention to details, eventually that'll affect you in the long term.
And that has to do also with the impulsivity too, yep. Just wanting to get it done so fast. So working memory or juggling bits of information in the moment. A lot of kids, part of executive function is working memory, being able to manage a few details while you're in a process of something. Now this one with organization, this is not an aspect of executive function, but this is just my kids who struggle with executive function, usually their backpacks are not organized meaningfully. And if they do seem organized, usually it's only organized enough to get you off their back. Transitions and pivoting. So this is the kid who has trouble getting out of the door in the morning. They're always forgetting things. Transitioning from class to class is very hard for them. Pivoting from class to class, being prepared for class. These are the kids who, in parent-teacher conferences, they're always like, yeah, your kid's unprepared. Your kid's always unprepared. yeah, they're struggling. Be compassionate, be empathetic, be patient with this kid. They don't have these skills to juggle with working memory everything they need to in the time frame that we're giving them, and they keep getting in trouble. I'm sorry if I sound frustrated. I hate seeing kids like be punished for this stuff. They can't yet. Next.
And one of the things Sarah Ward talks about a lot is this is use visuals when your kids are struggling with transitions versus words. So what does the picture of the backpack look like when it's ready? What does it look like when it's not ready? What clothes are you going to wear? What does it look like when it's laid out in the bed? What does it look like when it's on and it's neat? What does it look like when go down to breakfast and then when you go out the door? My son Sean has Asperger's and really struggled with transitions. So what we had to do was set up a whole series of visual events to help him get from class to class to class. So when he would leave the special needs room, because he was getting work on some area, there would be a series of pictures that helped him recognize where he was going. Otherwise, he'd get lost in the classroom. He'd get lost with that sensory overexcitability that would just shut him down. And so that helped him. So use visuals when you can.
And I want to get to the Q&A in 9 minutes, which is not going to happen. So I'm so I just, like I said, drinking from the fire hose, everybody, there's so much, and I want to get to the strategies. So self-starting, procrastination is the opposite of self-starting. It's also called task initiation, self-starting. But so self-starting is part of executive function.
Mm-hmm.
Follow through, next. And so self-starting, follow through, and finishing are part of executive function. Metacognition, self-awareness, introspection, self-reflection, those are all basically in my mind lumped together as metacognition. That's part of executive function, knowing how we process. And then the emotional regulation piece, the overwhelm, knowing how to work with them, how to regulate emotion is part of executive function.
Absolutely.
Advocacy is not technically part of executive function, but I put this in as an aspect because it is so important to be able to really speak your truth and ask for help. And a lot of these kids, it's very hard for them. They felt shut down. They've had experiences where they haven't been heard or been shamed when they tried to ask for help. So they learn, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. Next.
Yeah, you have to specifically teach them self-advocacy skills through simulations.
And in this one, I said 20, there were only 16, sorry. Anyhow, foundations, implementation, and maintenance. The way that I teach how to get from point A to point B, and basically when I said systems, mindsets, habits, and routines, and using baby steps, how I'm gonna break that down a little bit more. How do we do that? One, I give my students a foundation in the systems, mindsets, habits, routines. Okay, systems, mindsets, habits, and routines. We gotta get a foundation and figure out what those are. So in my methodology, I break down what I believe are the main pieces that they need and to have a foundation. We build that foundation, then we implement for months or years until we get to sort of step 3, which is where we want to be, which is a maintenance phase where kids are really maintaining their systems, their mindsets, their habits, and their routines. And that is where we are at point B, where we can go, this kid's going to be okay. That's where we're trying to get to. Now, how do we do that? Well, I talk about Franken's study, which essentially just, I'm not going to go into the picture, but essentially means when we're teaching the systems, mindsets, habits, and routines, we have to not cookie cutter this. We have to personalize, customize, tailor, work towards their preferences, give them workarounds that work for them. So this is personalized. It's not just cookie cutter. So all my kids are so different. These are neurodiverse kids. Next. I don't need that one. Okay, so one thing that I do in terms of strategy, listen, visual, like Mike said, visual, from what Sarah Ward said. I help my kids obnoxiously. So first of all, we don't use 3-ring binders because they're just a nightmare for kids with executive function struggles. Unless they're guided compassionately, patiently, and empathetically from a teacher on how to use a 3-ring binder. For 99% of my kids, 3-ring binders don't work. I color code. Notice we got a red folder and an orange folder, massive letters, front and the back, name on the front and the back. This is the kid who has a big folder, leaves it on the ground in the middle of the hallway. There's no name on it, and it gets kicked all over the hallway, and the custodians throw the paper. I've seen this happen so many times, throw the papers away at the end of the day because they're everywhere and nobody knows whose it is. And anyhow, labels, 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 visual, visual, visual. Next. Now, massive, massive, massive strategy in my work is chunking. There are only 2 ways to chunk. How do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with 1 step. We are asking these kids to do so much, and we haven't taught them strategies of chunking. So they just think, oh, I got homework to do. That's a big abstract thing out there. It's overwhelming me. I think I'll avoid it. They don't know where to start. They need to learn the skills of chunking. They have to make it into baby steps, okay? And this is cool when kids really start getting how to chunk by task and time. Here's how you chunk by task. By task, let's say they have to write a paper. Well, reading the rubric is a chunked task. Doing the outline is a chunked task. Writing the intro is a chunked task. Writing an essay is not a chunk task. That's overwhelming. That's a lot of big steps in one thing. That's too much. How do you chunk math? Well, let's say you have 30 problems to do. Do 3, do 5, do the first section of math problems. We have to teach them how to chunk things. It just feels too big for them. Time, how do you chunk by time? Well, can you clean your room for 1 minute with a timer? Literally, like I chunk things down really small. So much of this is about emotions. They're overwhelmed. How do we make it not overwhelming? Chunk it down. Can you clean your room for 1 minute? Can you clean your backpack for 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes? Can you work on math for 2 minutes? Can you work on math for 10 minutes? Can you study for 2 minutes? Not study for an hour, not do math for an hour, not, again, the narrative in the story is this is too big. How do we work with the narrative in the story? All right, kiddo, let's just do this much. Now, I know there are you parents out there going, well, Seth, if my kiddo only did 5 minutes of homework, they'd never get anything done. And you're right. But the magic is this. What we're doing is we're chunking it down so that they can emotionally be able to take that small bite-sized piece. And then they can start to get momentum. Then they can start getting some stuff done. So procrastination, self-starting, it's so hard. But chunking by task and by time is how we help them to work with the overwhelm so that they can take that first step and start getting some momentum. So I really want to just encourage you to beware of when you say you got to do your homework or you got to clean your room or this or that. Clean your room, that's a lot. What does that even mean? Chunk it.
When you do a lot of chunking and you practice chunking, you build the child's stamina in that task. And that is really, really important so they can go longer. But you got to start somewhere.
You got it. Yep. You got to start somewhere. Yep. Okay. S&O strategy. So Sunday night overhaul. So I talk about the systems, the reorganizing the backpack, organizing the study space, checking your portals, checking your email, updating your planner, advocating for yourself. S&O means Sunday night overhaul. So I teach my students to every Sunday night or once a week, whatever, go through all their systems that I list. I have an assessment somewhere, you can find it on my site, but all the systems that I list on a Sunday night overhaul, they should really overhaul everything because these are not maintainers. These are not kids who maintain their systems well. People don't expect them to. They need to learn how to have regular times when they overhaul all their systems so that they can sort of reset regularly. That is a big key to my success. Please steal that one. Next, please. They also need a sacred study space, a customized, personalized, tailored. This is a real picture, by the way. He made a hamster wheel for himself. He has a standing desk and all the things, but basically they just need a sacred study space for themselves. Not just sit down and do your homework, but how can they personalize a study space where they can actually do 2 things in an SSS? Minimize distractions, maximize for focus. So that's the sacred study space. Setting up your browser on Chrome or whatever is really important. My font is a little bit messed up, Mike, from the...
Don't worry about it.
But anyhow, no, it's not. You can't do anything. But when I emailed the PowerPoint in.
Oh, yeah, no, it's okay.
So listen, parents, your kids can find the things that are interesting to them online in a second. and it's really hard to find the homework and sift through the portals. I know it's a nightmare, but you still want to make your bookmarks bar or your browser or whatever, set it up, spend time. It'll take you a half hour to an hour when I do this with families. Like, get all the passwords in one place, get all of the links in one, like spend some time doing that. That's a really good strategy that will help like shave off time from an already tedious task that they don't feel like doing. Less is more. Oh my gosh. So one of the problems a lot of my kids have, parents, is that, you know, you the parent, or if their teacher's watching, you're looking at it and you're like, the kid has to do X homework. Well, the truth is, as far as learning is concerned, let's say that your kid has homework that takes most kids 20 minutes and it takes your kid over an hour. They're not learning more by spending more time. They're actually getting more frustrated, and they're just really trying to get it over with. And as far as learning is concerned, it's often, let's say that you have a math paper with 30 problems. I would rather the kid do 3 problems, high quality, perfect, take their time, have some discussion, be done. They'll learn more from that often than 30 problems. And this happens in all kinds of areas. You know, I was working with a kid this summer who hates writing, 5th grader, who's now in 6th after summer, reluctant writer. And we were doing a couple of sentences of journaling a day. Now the teacher is expecting a bunch of journals for 6th grader. A couple of sentences should not be painful for a 6th grader. Well, for this kid, it is. Thank goodness we did that all summer. We just did a couple sentences a day, and this kiddo is now able to do fairly well on what they're doing. And but it's just, you don't need a lot. It's, you know, you can even think about it with fitness and working out. You could do a 15-minute workout 3 times a week and get a ton of benefit. Like, you don't have to necessarily do a lot. So this is very big. Less is more. And if there's so much going on with your kid, you have to advocate and tell them, look, we need to accommodate this. Okay, next.
I was going to add too, in terms of the advocating for the child. If your child has 30 math problems all at the same level, if they do 3 and they master the 3, there's absolutely no reason for them to do the extra 27. They have proven mastery. And that is a message you can take to the teacher, is saying, well, they didn't finish all their homework. Well, you know what? If the homework isn't scaffolded in terms of going, you know, getting harder and harder, and it's not, you know, teaching them anything, I'm not going to waste my time. You know, I wouldn't do 17 reports that are all the same if I can get them done in one. So, you know, you have to advocate in this sense, because actually the research on homework is pretty clear that the majority of homework is fairly busy work and not really helpful in terms of learning. But that's a totally different topic, another podium.
And thank you for saying that. If you want to learn about that, look up Alfie Kohn. Can somebody type his name properly in the chat? Because it's
ALFIEKOHN. There you go.
But he's your guy for the homework research. So next thing, strategy-wise, this is a weird strategy, but this is supposed to be fun. Play with your kid, laugh with your kid, have fun with your kid, connect with your kid. Don't be so heavy. Don't take everything so seriously. Have some levity. They're going to be okay. Next. I'm not going to talk about content, process, and product.
Okay.
Planning. So our kids, like I said before, planning is there are a lot of skills. I'm going to talk about this really quick as far as strategies are concerned, and the most important things on here. So what I do is I teach kids, this is the gist of how I teach planning. First of all, I say what's your NOP, or your number 1 priority, or your MIT, or your most important thing. So the top thing where it says history and reading chapter 5, I ask my kids all the time this question: what is your NOP, your number 1 priority today? This is a skill, but it's a really good one, because your kids should be able to say, well, the most important thing for me to do today is finish X, Y, and Z. Anyhow, then we just write, you know, 3, 4, or 5 things. If your kid has a to-do list that's 50 things, parents, and you printed off the list of all their missing work, it's overwhelming. Not going to happen. Your intentions are good. Not going to happen. Has to be doable. So what are the 3, 4, or 5 things they need to do tonight? Tasks. So what I do is I have them say, what's your number 1 priority? Then I say, what else you have to do? Then I say, how long do you think it'll take? Then I say, what order do you want to do it through? I'm going to talk about this for a moment because it's important and this will help you. The reason I ask them how long it will take after I ask them what they do is because they need to know how long it's going to take before they choose what order they do them. My kids do not prioritize well. They don't know where to start. Knowing where to start has to do with skill, executive function skills. You are teaching them to prioritize. So how long you think it'll take? 45, 20, 20. I don't care if they're completely off base on how long it'll take. Why? Because this teaches them to start to calibrate how long things take. They have no idea how unrealistic they are. All my kids are unrealistic about how much time and energy things take. How do they learn? How much time and energy things take. They articulate their estimate and see where they're wrong. We do it over and over and over. They start to get better at estimating time. Okay, so I say, what do you got to do? How long will it take? Then I say, what order? Real quick on the order. People are different in how they order things. So there's 5 major things that I find people commonly order things by. People want to do the easiest first, the quickest first, the hardest first, the longest first, or the number 1 priority first, the most important first. So just say, what do you want to do first? Why did you choose to do Spanish first? And listen to what they say and let them do it. Now, there's one exception, and that is when there's urgency, like if there's something due tomorrow, obviously that would be first. But anyhow, that is the gist of this. It may not seem like much, but this piece of paper teaches so many skills. I may have it on my site somewhere. Mike, I can give you a copy to send out to the participants.
Yep. That'd be great.
Just more forms of planning. I don't really care what it looks like. I care that they have the skills. Planning is so big. Next. Yep. Co-regulation, I think I talked enough about it. You can look this one up, but learn to co-regulate more. Next.
And learn to listen. I have so many parents that don't spend enough time listening, and I'm just as guilty. I'm always ready for the comment or to help guide them through it when I'm not really actually listening to them. It's so important.
Attunement, I've talked enough about attunement. Wait time. Mike just said, listen, here's what wait time is. Mike, what's your number 1 priority today after this?
I'm deliberately waiting your time. My number 1 priority is to get some food for my son, I guess.
So wait time, I teach a lot with the parents with listening. It's really where you ask your child a question and you really wait to hear them. Now, the goal is not that you and your child agree. Listen very carefully to this, please. The goal is that your child feel heard. What's the goal? That your child feel heard. So wait time is how we ask our child a question. Hey, what's going on? And then they answer. Usually they're going to give us a canned response. And here's where the wait time really comes in. That's when you don't want to then respond. You want to keep waiting, or you want to say, tell me more, or you want to say, I'm listening. That's the magic, is really learning to cultivate this experience of having a communication with your child where you might even wait 30 seconds. Sometimes I do have kids where I'm like, take your time, I'm going to wait. And then I don't stare at them because that's creepy. I say, take your time, answer me when you're ready, and I look away. This is so important with attunement, co-regulation, and them feeling heard, and attachment theory, and their nervous system knowing that you're going to hear them and you're going to make them feel heard. Next, please. We talked about that. Oh my God, I could talk about this for 5 hours. One of the biggest questions I get from parents is, how do we get buy-in? So ownership and buy-in, where if you want to help your child overcome their own resistance and be able to have good enough executive function that they can be successful in school and life, they have to have, and when Mike talked about passion projects, they have to have more and more ownership and buy-in as time goes by. If there's no ownership and buy-in, you're not going to get traction. You may push them to get something done in the moment, but you're not going to get traction. You're not going to get real momentum, real traction, real change.
look up George Betts and some of this with his autonomous learner model. It's a progression of building ownership with the kids over time as they mature, and really, really important in terms of motivation.
Okay, next. I might stop after one or two more, Mike, and we'll do
that's good. That's good.
I will say the 3-to-1 rule. So I talk with parents a lot about the 3-to-1 rule. Please write this down. You want 3 positives to every 1 perceived negative. Now, Karen Tuia Boys says that parents and teachers tend to do 20 to 30 negatives for every positive that a kid hears. But this is one of my magic secrets to helping kids, is that I really notice every single thing that I possibly can that they're doing, quote, right. So the 3-to-1 rule, I don't care if it's 2-to-1, 1 to, for a lot of parents, 1-to-1 is a massive improvement. The point is, write down 3-to-1, start practicing, maybe check yourself off on a note card every day and see how you're doing. But what we want to do with the 3-to-1 rule big time is notice our kids' effort, not notice completion, not notice what they finished, blah, blah, blah. Notice the effort they're trying. Notice everything that they do to try. They need to be seen. Next. High-low, and this is where I'll stop today. So a high-low and a temperature check are 2 ways that I increase metacognition with kids and that I increase attunement, co-regulation, and secure attachment. But it's also a way for me to figure out what's really going on with the kids so that I can help them. Very, very, very easy tools, parents. Here's how the high-low works. So I say, hey, Mike, what's your high-low? And Mike says, oh, well, today, Seth, my high is doing this webinar. My low is that my back's hurting me. Cool. And then I say, cool, tell me more. And Mike says, oh, well, today the webinar, blah, 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 my back, blah, blah, blah. And I use wait time to really hear these things. Now, the temperature check is similar. I say, hey, Mike, what's your temperature? And you can do this for any circumstance. I can say, hey, Mike, what's your high-low for the day? I can say, hey, Mike, what's your high-low for math class today? What's your high-low with your planner, your backpack, your parent, whatever. So the temperature check, hey, Mike, what's your temperature for the webinar? Mike might say, oh, it's an 8. And I say, why is it an 8? And Mike says, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. The magic question with the temperature check is, what would make it a 9 or 1 point better? So your kid says, oh, it was a 0. So you say, cool, what would make it a 1? Again, baby steps. We're really helping our kids come up with their own solutions. We're really listening, we're really hearing them, and we're really helping them come up with their own ways. You know, if they go from an 8 to a 9, how can they come up with different solutions? What are easy ways? Anyhow, really, I think the note that I'll end on is this word that I don't have in the presentation. And Mike, you can stop that screen share. The note that I'll leave on is validation. So validation means that they feel heard, that they feel validated. You don't have to agree with them. And I don't want you to mislead or lie, or that's not the point of this. But I do want you to validate them and say, wow, that sounds really hard. That sounds really cool. That sounds like that's really cool to you. That sounds really interesting. You want to be validated. You, the person listening, you want to feel validated, not invalidated by anybody, by your spouse, by your parents, by your friends, by somebody at a retail store. You want to feel validated and heard. So.
All right. Well, thanks, Seth. And folks, I think Seth already had his email up there earlier. Mine is the ampost97 if you have more questions, and if we don't get to every single question, because we are already sitting at 6:14. So that's totally fine. But I'm going to do a stop share here.
Thanks.
And I also wanted to let folks know that we didn't talk a ton about the brain, and which is a fascinating thing. It's one of my little pet topics. But we did do a webinar on it. Dr. Matt Zakreski and myself did one in September, which is a lot more in depth if you have any interest. But anyway, let's get to Q&A. And I have 3 in the Q&A box here. How do you want to tackle this? Seth, do you want me to read them to you, or do you want to just? Yeah. All right. How does one judge failure with these kids? They may well be passing courses and doing relatively well when compared to others, but nowhere near achieving what they're capable of, or where they had been achieving up earlier on in school. And actually, folks, we teach kids resistance as they get older in school. So part of that is what's going on there. if we can see their EF is holding them back, we should surely still be concerned? Question mark.
Yeah, do you want me to tackle these?
Yeah, go ahead.
I actually just saw it and then it vanished.
Oh, that's because I
Oh, you
closed
clicked
it.
answered. I see it. Yeah, I figured out how to open it.
Yep.
That is a very, very, very good question, Karen, that we could talk about for hours. And you know, the word failure is a very interesting word. I really could go. This is a big conversation. So I will try to give you a valuable response, but that is a massive question. So I'm going to start with the end where you said we should surely still be concerned. Yes, you should surely still be concerned, but there's a but. There are a lot of buts on this one. But yeah, you should absolutely be concerned. Now, I want to talk about concern real quick. When we are concerned about our kids, we have to filter through our programming that we have received from our schooling, our parents, our dysfunction and our cultures, our subcultures, our messaging that we've gotten from the media and news all our life and all that stuff. So when we are concerned, we have to filter through that stuff to see, is my anxiety and my concern based on the big picture and the real reality of the situation? So how concerned should I be in about what parts of this? Now, so some of us are prone to anxiety. So we're going to be even more concerned maybe than we quote should be, or than would need to be for the situation. And anyhow, there's those that we have to filter through. So I want to pose that. We have to filter through those kinds of questions very seriously. And what I really want to recommend, Karen, or to anybody with that, I want to recommend that you pull out a journal and hand write, should I be concerned? The question, should I be concerned? And write for 2 or 3 pages, everything you can think of to get more clarity about that. The reason I'm saying this is because there are many situations with kids where you should be really concerned, where really pivotal negative things can happen in their life because of decision making, because of things that happen that impact the rest of their life. This is not a joke. You know, I have kids that struggle with addiction and mental health issues and things. Yes, you should be concerned, and you should take things like that very seriously. But as you're filtering, you're also going to look at things like they're not achieving what they are capable of. What does that mean? How important is it? What are they achieving that may not be measured by school? Maybe they're learning it in school, but it's not being measured. Maybe they're learning it through their own hobbies and passions and interests, but nobody's measuring it. Like, what does that really mean, achieving what they're capable of? And does that mean they're not going to be okay? Probably not, you know. And then what is impacting them not achieving that? What does life feel like for them? What does achievement mean? So I'd really look at, question those things. I mean, I don't believe in, so, you know, we were talking about homework earlier with Avi Cohn. I don't believe in letter grades. I think letter grades are morally wrong. I think the fact that we have a thing called an F that stands for fail, when it's really a failure of whatever the system is to meet the needs of that neurodiverse kid, in my view, I think that is disgusting and immoral. That grades even exist. We should do assessment, an authentic assessment, and meaningful assessments.
It's about continuous progress, folks. It's about continuous progress through their learnings. It's not about a standalone grade, because kids don't learn at a continual spectrum. They don't go like this. They go up and down and up and down and up and down. And so what Seth is saying is actually true. Grades are, the way we grade is, first of all, we're, in most cases when I'm observing teachers and grading, they're, first of all, they're not grading it properly. And second of all, they're emphasizing static instruction, static grading. And it really is completely opposite of what a child needs in terms of building them up. There's a great study I would like to talk to you about in terms of motivation through grading, but I don't think we have time. But if you email me, I can kind of explain it to you.
So, and then the last thing I want, where you say if we can see that EF is holding them back. Now, I mean, I definitely think you should be concerned about that. That is why I do everything I do. My whole life, I'm obsessed with executive function because that, to my brain, is for these kids who are falling through the cracks, is the most important thing that can be addressed, which is not. Often it's addressed with the shame, with try harder, stop being lazy, motivate yourself, those types of things, you know, that aren't working, or punishments or rewards or whatever. But yeah, I mean, that's, and follow my work. That is why I do what I do, because I do believe in it, because I've seen changed lives. So yeah, they need to compassionately, empathetically learn executive function skills so that they can have good enough executive function to be able to have a good life. That was a big answer, Karen, to an
Yeah.
awesome question. All
Well,
right, now,
executive functioning, in a sense, is related. It really encapsulates social and emotional balance, in a sense, and that is more important, folks, than academics. It just is. The academics is a route. Yes, it's important, but it's not as important as social emotional welfare. It's not as important as learning and being successful through EF skills. So you have to pay attention.
anonymous attendee at 3:15 asks, I don't know if I should go to the 4:15 questions. Okay, I'm just going to do this one and then I'll bounce a little bit. What
Yep.
does one do with a child who would prefer to be thought of as being lazy rather than having EF issues? Can understand that, as it obviously frames it as choice or not getting things done rather. Okay, well, so that's the narrative in the story. So, and they're capitalizing on, in a very intelligent way, actually. They're capitalizing on that. Can you leave those up, Mike?
Oh, sorry.
My eye is going back and forth to it. They're
No, that's
capitalizing on that in a very smart way, in a way, to avoid execution because it's hard and because they can't meet the expectation. So, so and so they're preferring to be thought of as lazy, as I was. I called myself a lazy failure because I was getting something from it. It benefited me. It helped me not take responsibility. So when I frame it that way, what did I need? I needed to learn compassionately and empathetically how to take responsibility. I needed to have an experience where I was safe with the people that were guiding me to take responsibility and to fail in safe ways and to, mess up, and but where it was safe, where I wasn't punished, and I was compassionately guided to the next step, the next step. So with a child like that, I think that the biggest thing is a lot of listening, hearing, understanding, time, connection, play, fun. Like, this kid needs to feel connected to you. They need to trust you. They need to feel heard. And then you got baby steps. It's going to be a long journey, but and it's not going to happen by lecturing or nagging or logic or reason telling them how it should be. But it's going to be when you're regulated and you guys are having real conversations, then piecemeal it will start to change. And also, I think the 3-to-1 rule, really seeing their effort and what they're so, this is a beautiful, amazing, awesome human being that you have the pleasure and gift of having in your life. I'm really noticing all of that in a not BS way and reflecting that back. Valerie, can you please suggest a couple of sponsored gap year programs? No. The only person I know is Blake Bowles. Start with Blake Bowles, Boles. But I am a big fan of gap years, though. Massive.
Yeah, me too. And I would actually, Valerie, I would suggest that you sit down with your child and kind of plan out what could be a gap year. And that, you talk about executive functioning, you plan out a gap year and you fill in the details and you do it together. And again, in a very safe environment, you're gonna see some pretty crazy things. So there's also someone asked about if we could do a seminar on what does it say? Seminar was helpful that teach these children about why they resist. Yeah, I think that's something that we can probably consider. So keep that in mind. I actually wrote it down in my notebook, anonymous. So
In my work, I have on my YouTube channel, I have a whole section called Just for Students. Like, I talk about this stuff, all resistance, all the time with kids. So dive into that. Jillian, or Gillian, I think it's Jillian. During pandemic, need to share space with kids, so I share office for work, school, Any advice on sacred space? I am not trying to be avoidant on your answer, but there's a lot on my site about that stuff. So dive into that. But I think the biggest one thing I can say on that is the buy-in and ownership, making it a collaborative process and having fun and
Have
creating.
fun, but also keep in mind that TUI kids need their sacred space. They need their safe zone, and that really shouldn't be related to any triggers. And if school's a trigger, that should be separated.
Catherine, how does one know when to start EF coaching? Well, if you're asking that question, it's probably time. How you like that answer? When is there enough buy-in? Okay, so I don't work with students where there's no, excuse me, where there's no buy-in. However, every kid I get is resistant. So what does that mean when Seth says that? So my job, so I do a meet and greet when I meet a kid, is to communicate to them on their level and say, this is what I do. Do you want it or not? But my job is to really frame it in such a way where hopefully they're like, yes, Seth, I want to do this for me. Like I want them to have buy-in. And if there's some buy-in, then I know I can help to get it. If there is no buy-in, and I'm very good at what I do, and if I can't get any buy-in, I will tell you this. There's usually a lot more going on underneath the iceberg. So if you look at the iceberg theory slide or look at my website for the word iceberg theory, if you search that and watch that video and look at the diagram, I am serious when I say this. There's often something else going on. There are often traumas or depression or anxiety or things that need a professional. There are people in our world who spent their careers focusing on helping people with certain areas. If your child is struggling with something you may not even know about because it's underneath the iceberg, and you start to discover, wow, my kiddo really needs this help, do everything in your power to get that help. But I'm saying that because a lot of the kids who are that resistant are those kids that really need a great therapist or counselor or intervention or somehow to address something that is lingering there before you can even get to the academics and the executive function stuff and whatever. They really need to work on some other foundational stuff.
And I would add to that that if the child can articulate to you why there is no buy-in, it's a little bit less stressful, in my opinion, than if they can't articulate it. When we look at underachievement versus non-production in our kids, classic underachievement is a neurological disorder, and you need help. You need professional help when you have someone that can't articulate why they can't or why they can't buy in. When they don't have the motivation, they just can't articulate it. When they can articulate and say, well, I just don't want to do it, or because it's boring or whatever, that gives me something to work with. But when they get to that point, yes, you need professional help.
I unfortunately have to leave in a minute because I have a 4:30.
Nope, that's totally fine.
But it is one of my students, and I can be 2 minutes late. So let me go through.
Let's do one more.
Or rapid fire. Okay. Is there one in particular, or should I just go next?
I think
I'll do 2 more. I'll do the next in the queue, and then you find one for the good of the group. How about that?
Yeah, I'll answer a few more folks if you want to hang on.
I'm the parent. First of all, I do want to say to everybody here right now, there are 38 people here. I'm not sure if you're all parents or not, but I just want to honor you from the bottom of my heart, sincerely, for taking the time to be here to learn more to help your child. And I'm honored to be a part of that process for you. Kristen says, I'm the parent of a wonderful 16-year-old who's been beaten down by the system. Inattentive type, slow processing, learning disability, anxiety is turned to self-medicating and self-harm to cope. How do we build up the self-confidence back up? Well, number one, professional help, absolutely, positively, immediately. Number two, I have 3 things that I'm going to say. Number two, what I want to talk about with that situation is something that came up a lot on the Executive Function Summit. I run TFOS, the Executive Function Online Summit for Parents. So many of the professionals and experts talk about the need for parents to do their own deep inner work. So to help your child, you doing your own self-care, looking at your own triggers or quote baggage, or getting your own therapist or counselor, or self-development books, or journaling, or meditation, or cleaning up your past and the things that are sort of, you know, your skeletons in the closet, and all those, that hard, scary, deep inner work, that is one of the best things you can do. If that's you and your spouse working on the relationship, you and your spouse, if there is a spouse, separately working on your own lives, all that stuff, your own deep inner work is my first response. Number two is the attachment, is the seeing your kid, hearing your kid, reading about attachment theory, understanding attachment theory. And then number three would be the co-regulation, attunement, and emotional regulation stuff. So that would be learning more and more about your nervous system, your child's nervous system, how you co-regulate and attune, how you can teach it through modeling it, and all of those sorts of anything about emotional regulation. And this is a great question, and thank you for asking it, because obviously you're not the only one, and I know how scary, because I've worked with a lot of these kids who are self-medicating and self-harm, and that is terrifying for a parent to watch. So those would be my biggest, the self-care and self-development stuff, the attachment theory stuff, and the emotional regulation stuff.
And always remember, parents, as a caring adult, you are the anchor for our kids. And our kids feel your pain, they feel your anxiety, they feel when you're afraid. Or, you know, twice exceptional kids, gifted kids sense the aura around you. So you have to, my wife always calls it, you know, attach your oxygen mask first before you help your child, because otherwise you won't be able to help them. So, which is a good analogy, but some great advice. And Seth, we're going to let you go then, and just say thank you so much. I'm going to try, folks, to stay on a wee bit and answer a few more questions. But it's also getting late.
I just saw the Fortnite one, and that one made me laugh. The 15-year-old's making money. My first thought was, man, let them get the Fs if they pay the mortgage. And just kidding. But that's hilarious. You are all welcome. Oh, hey, Joni, good to see your name there. So again, thank you, Mike, for having me, and I just appreciate you all for being here. And that's it.
Yeah. We really appreciate you being here, Seth, and thank you for your wisdom and your guidance for us, and so appreciate it. But I know you got to get going, so just take off. And before you go, folks, I just want to remind everyone that there will be copies of this recording once my wife actually puts it in, because I'm not a techno person, and she's on vacation right now, but I'll let her know. And remember, copyright. These slides, you can use them in a sense and learn from them, but please remember the origins and respect the copyright. So thank you so much. And thank you, Seth, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.